Okay, I gotta respond to this. I love this comment from Po Girl. She's been watching my videos for a while. I made a video called MyHeritage DNA test results. I'm 31.8% Iberian, but no direct link to Spain. Here's what Po Girl had to say about that video. Quote, I mentioned at the beginning of the year that I was getting my DNA tested with MyHeritage and got the results about a month ago. Not really surprising except for the 5% African, which I did not think I inherited any since I look nothing like my gramps or even my mom. I resemble my dad, who was mostly Scottish-Irish, of which I was 50%. The other was 25% Scandinavian. I only knew relatives from Germany and 20% Iberian and Italian. I am not sure how accurate MyHeritage is, and I really hope I can talk my mom into testing since she is getting on in years, and I want to see how much African she inherited from her dad. I actually studied dance my entire life, and Middle Eastern and flamenco were at my favorites as an adult. Didn't know it was in my DNA because I'm an all-American mutt, no traditional favorites from any one nationality. End quote. I love this comment. Perhaps the reason I love it is because it sounds to ring true so much for my own story. Even how I've talked about how I've been, nearly a decade now, I've been kosher or halal. I haven't eaten pork or shellfish, only to find out that my mom's Italian DNA barely exists. Instead, it's Sephardic Jewish and Middle Eastern. So I've got this DNA from people who historically don't eat pork or shellfish, and I can't be surprised by that, or the fact that I, by default, love spicy food. I eat hot sauce and hot peppers with every meal for lunch and dinner. And of course, I have a grandma who is Mexican American. So not surprised by those things, even though my Mexican grandma didn't eat spicy food necessarily. I was drawn to it. So I'm not surprised to hear her say this. But I do want to acknowledge a few things in this video that I think are very relevant that Po Girl had to say. She was surprised by the African, but in my own experience from my mom's test, I learned that, and this is how I feel, if you are Italian and or Iberian, which my mom is both, by default I am both, but her test showed that she was African descent. She was a little bit Italian, even though her father was supposedly 100%. My mom was only like 4.5%. Well, what happens is, in my mind, if you're of Spanish, Portuguese, Greek, Italian descent, then therefore there's a little bit of everything in there from those things I just named, often including Middle Eastern, Jewish, African. Like, it's pretty normal. I would speculate that most people, especially who go through MyHeritage, which is where I went through with my mom, if you go through MyHeritage and you know already that you're of Spanish descent and or Italian especially, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, expect to be African, expect to be Jewish, expect to be Middle Eastern. Because as I've said before, Southern Europe was more ethnically mixed compared to Northern Europe. There was more mixing going on. So and I've learned now, when if say on TV, I see someone who's Italian, like they're Italian born, their nationality is Italian and therefore their DNA is Italian. They look Italian. I think I'm looking at someone who has Italian DNA, but who probably also has Middle Eastern, Jewish, Turkish, Greek, Spanish, and I think the same thing with Spanish people. I think they're largely of the same age. That's what I think that people of those origins are. So I'm not surprised at all about this. And I also want to point out what she said about having her mom get tested. Absolutely, yes, do that. Because we only get half of our DNA from each parent, but we don't know which half from each parent that we're getting. That's why my sister and I have such different DNA test results, because we got heavier parts of different parts of both of our parents' DNA. But the last line here, no traditional favorites from any one side of any one nationality, is what she's saying. And I want to close by pointing out this fact that, okay, this whole concept that my mom was half Italian, So we ate so much Italian food because culturally we were part Italian. And I remember, I think I was 15 or 16, We were leading up to Thanksgiving, and I told my mom, I said, you know what? Do we have to have turkey for Thanksgiving? I know that's what we're supposed to do, but I'd rather have lasagna. Can we? And it started a tradition where she just basically started making a lasagna every Thanksgiving, and I didn't even, if there was turkey, I didn't even care about it, because especially when you're a kid, you get turkey everywhere. You'd get it for school lunch, at the church dinner leading up to it, they'd have turkey. I didn't want turkey, you know? And so we had this tradition where we would have lasagna for a lot of things. Instead of what we were supposed to have for Thanksgiving or Christmas, we have lasagna. And it was more of that cultural identity, only to find out that my mom is barely Italian, but it was that cultural identity that she had carried with her and part of her identity. But then hidden in there, even though my test showed 0 Jewish and only 0.8% Middle Eastern, my mom showed 15.2% Sephardic Jewish and like 14% Middle Eastern. So that Spanish DNA showed up as those things in her test, but on mine, because you adopt different parts of your DNA, and they can basically reveal themselves differently in children. You know, I'm nearly a third Iberian, Spanish, Portuguese. And my understanding is that Jewish and Middle Eastern that showed up in my mom's test, when it showed up on mine, it showed up as Spanish instead. You know, it was guided, it was disguised underneath Iberian, but really you're looking at a guy who is of Jewish and Middle Eastern descent. We just never fully knew that. I never would have guessed Middle Eastern. Jewish, I had my speculations on. But I think that's kind of what goes with the territory. I don't know if it's so much the case with DNA tests with other companies, but in my experience, definitely if you take MyHeritage and you show up to be Italian or think you're Italian, expect to also be African, which my mom showed up to be 2%. Expect to be African, expect to be Jewish, Middle Eastern, Greek, Spanish. It's all just kind of in the mix over there. Again, comparatively speaking to where if you think that you're Scots-Irish, then that part of you probably is pretty much Scotch-Irish and not a whole lot. Don't expect many surprises other than that. But man, if you think that you're Southern European, expect to learn that you're also Jewish, Middle Eastern, lots of other things. So I think that's interesting. I'm fascinated by the fact that there's the separation of cultural identity of what we think we are as Americans from where we think that our ancestors came from, or in my case, where my ancestors actually came from. Great-grandparents who came from Italy, and my mom's only 4.5% Italian, and I showed 0% Italian. But I think it's interesting. There's a difference between what we think we are, based on maybe even where our ancestors actually came from, or what we were told where they came from. We take the test, and then find out, oh, I'm this instead? Well, that makes sense now, because I have leanings toward this thing, and that actually reflects culture of what my actual DNA says. I think that's so cool. Never in the history of the world could we take a DNA test and even have these discussions. That's why people who watch my channel watch these videos, because we could not have this conversation even really 10 years ago. These tests are affordable. We can discuss these things. We can learn from each other. DNA tests are fun, aren't they?